Welcome to the Teapot Reads. My name's Sam. I'm the Teapot. This is what I'm currently reading, and I'm so happy to see you today. Hello and welcome. Welcome back if you're a subscriber, and welcome if this is your first time here. This is not like a wrap-up. I'm not gonna be talking about literally every book I've read recently. This is just some of the books that I've read recently and want to talk about. I also actually finished Fourth Wing recently. You can check out my full review here-ish. I'll up here wherever it is on the screen. It'll also be linked down below if you want to see my full thoughts on Fourth Wing, because I have a lot of them and I did not like that book. Right now I'm reading a couple different things. I have a really bad habit of reading multiple books at once. I only say bad habit because I don't always finish these books, and when I read multiple books at once, it's very easy to be like, oh, you know what, I'm just gonna take a break from that one and pick up new shiny object, and then I never actually finish that book. So I've been in the middle of Chain of Thorns, the sixth Anne of Green Gable book, the Final Strife, Noragami volume 15, and this A History of Sex, I think it's called. I've been in the middle of those books for months with little to no progress, except for on the Final Strife, which I was picking up and reading again and then put down again. I'm really close to the ending, so I need to just finish it. It's not bad, I just keep getting distracted. The two books that I am mainlining, I guess, are Godkiller by Hannah Keener, which I'm reading the physical version of. It's not out in America yet, so it comes out in September. We're gonna talk about it in a second. And my audiobook is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which was recommended to me by a coworker who absolutely loved it and basically was like, you have to read it. This is my audiobook for journeys to and from work. Godkiller is about a world where the gods are very present, or they were very present in everyday life, and there's a lot of gods. It kind of actually reminds me of the 100,000 Kingdoms series by N.K. Jemisin, and the way that the gods kind of exist and are numerous. However, it takes place after the God Wars, which basically decimated the city of Blenraden and decimated so many people. It was this massive scale tragedy. And actually, because it has that massive scale tragedy, it kind of reminds me of Witch King as well, because there's this sort of grieving undercurrent of this book, and you know that this world is sort of recovering from this horrific thing that happened. But because of the God Wars, the current king, King Aaron, he basically decreed that gods and worship is illegal and basically justified or legalized god killing, which is called Godkiller. I don't want to call her the protagonist, but she's definitely one of the protagonists. Kissin is a god killer, and she's very good at what she does. She's very Witcher vibes, and I 100% love her. She's fucking cool, man. She's cool, and she's a really well-developed character. She very much is the type of character, though, that I feel like she easily could have been written more traditional. Okay, this is gonna sound weird. There's male character archetypes, especially in fantasy, and Geralt is a really good example of that. And Kissin is basically that character archetype, and I don't typically see that as a female character. And I wouldn't be surprised, I haven't really looked at reviews, but I wouldn't be surprised if people didn't like Kissin because of that. Not to say that they're biased intentionally, but people have a lot of unconscious biases, and I think that this definitely could. I love that character type just across the board, and I love Kissin. She's great. So Kissin is a god killer, and at the start of this, we actually see the reason she became a god killer. We have a prequel, or a prologue, where her whole family was sacrificed to a fire god because they worshipped an ocean god, and the people were like, fuck no. Anyway, Kissin survived that, grows up, becomes a god killer in this post-God War world. That's a really rather important job. Then there is Elagast, or Elo. He is a knight, and he was Aaron's best friend, but he, after the war, has fairly severe PTSD, and he decided to retire and become a baker. He also doesn't 100% agree with the god killing, because there were gods that fought on like their side during the God War, and afterwards Aaron was still like death to them all. You also find out though that Aaron the king is only still alive because a god helped him, and Elo feels like even worse about this whole thing. But Aaron is like, I'm dying, please help. So Elo has to go on like a quest to basically get him help. Where I'm not 100% sure how yet, if he's just going to ask like a boon of a god or what's going on. And then there's Inara, who is a young noble woman, and she's a kid. I want to say she's like 14, 15. I feel like they said her age, but I don't remember. But I want to say around 14. She is attached to Sketty, who is this little guy here. He is the god of white lies. He's so cute. I freaking love him. Like his physical description is really cute. He is like a rabbit with antlers and with wings, and he changes sizes. He's really cute. But she's attached to him, and she doesn't really know why. And he doesn't know why. He doesn't have any memory. He doesn't have a shrine, which is really strange. That's like a god's home, and he doesn't have a shrine. And what happens is Inara and Sketty beg Kissin to help them, and after Inara's whole family is murdered, Kissin does agree. And so they are going on a quest to Blenrayden to find out how to free Sketty and Inara, and they meet Elagast on the way. I'm loving it so much because it's so, first of all, really well written. It is written so like clearly. I think sometimes fantasy books can get really mired down in descriptions, and this is not. It's like very clear, concise descriptions that work. The world building is super smart. I really love some of it. It's actually in that way reminding me of like Sanderson world building, and that he really can come up with a concept that I'm like, I never would have thought of that before. There's this whole city that like exists on this giant bridge. The city is the bridge. It's so very cool. The way the gods work is really cool. Very Witcher vibes, like I said. Also very like Witch King grieving vibes, and I loved Witch King, so also really enjoyed that. I am less than 100 pages from the ending, and part of me wants to finish it today. Part of me wants to keep savoring it. So I think that's a really good mark for a book when I like want to get through it. And I'm sad I put this off for so long because I've had it for a bit. The other book, though, like I said, is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. It is a dark academia. My coworker was praising this to high heavens, and she was like, it's just fantastic, and I am enjoying it. I'm like 30%-ish through, I think. I just feel like it's queer baiting, or I'm worried it's queer baiting. It is very similar setup to The Secret History. It's about a bunch of theater kids at a private preppy school, although it takes place in Illinois, which, hey, gotta love that. And they're in their senior year, and one of them gets murdered. Or I guess he's killed. I'm pretty sure he was murdered, but that's fine if he wasn't. I could be totally wrong. However, there's just a lot of what I'm worried is going to end up being queer baiting in this book, because Oliver and James have a very soft relationship with each other. They seem to be like kind of emotionally dependent on each other, not in a toxic way, but like James needs to like cool off at one moment, and he sends like everyone else away, and Oliver's like, do you want me to stay? And he's like, please, I just can't handle everyone else. And then like that feels personal, and there's just all these little moments, and the way, because it's told from Oliver's point of view, the way he talks about James, I'm just like, it feels like there's romantic connection there, but I am so worried it's gonna just end up being queer bait. And maybe it's meant to be that they're like in the closet, because it is about Shakespeare, it is about performing, and there's a line where Oliver even says, our whole lives are performance, it's what we live for. And I'm like, yeah, maybe you could get away with it, but it just, in reading it and not being certain, and when I asked my coworker, I was like, is it queer? And she was like, I was like, I'm tired of queer baiting. It's a good book. It's a good book outside of that. It's just getting really frustrating makes me want to read something actually queer. So probably my next audiobook will be. I think the next one I was considering was Archive Undying, which I think is queer. Could be wrong. It's like you're almost, it's like you can see your blanket across the room, but you can't get to it and you can't get fully comfortable. That's how it kind of feels reading this book and not being certain if it's just dragging me along in that regard. That's like a personal thing. I don't think it is queer baiting because there are queer characters throughout the book, and like I said, or I should say, I don't think it's malicious. And because I do think it could be queer baiting. I'm not sure, but I don't think it's maliciously done because there are actually quite a few queer characters, and there is also, like I said, that really important aspect of performance, and that's a thread just throughout the whole novel that I can already tell is happening. I'm like 30%, like I said. And so I definitely don't think it's malicious. I think it's like a conversation, and I think it's actually probably a boon to the book because it would enhance the theming. I just am frustrated with it on a personal level as a reader, and that's just where I am with that one right now. Taking it back to 2 months ago, I want to say. I read this in June. Although, hold on, let's see. Maybe I did read this in July. Anyway, Winter's Promise. This is the first of the Mirror Visitor Quartet by Christelle Dabos. This is translated from French. The translator is Hildegard Serrel, I think. And I'm probably mispronouncing that, so I'm sorry. I've had this book on my shelf for a long time. I'm really glad I read it, and I do plan on reading the rest of the series probably very soon, actually. It is oftentimes pegged as like Ghibli-esque, and I 100% agree. I actually get very Ghibli vibes and also very like Philip Pullman vibes, like writing style and some of the themes that are kind of coming to the front. The translation did sometimes get a little clunky. There were weird things going on occasionally. However, it also did allow for some really unique descriptions that I enjoyed. And overall, I did really like it. I've heard mixed things about the rest of the series. I'm excited. It's also kind of really trippy. It's a surreal little book, which I did not expect. It's about Ophelia, who can travel in or through mirrors, and she also can read the history of items by like touching them. She ends up betrothed to this man named Thorn, who is from a different arc because the world like was destroyed or something in the past, and the different parts of the world split off into arcs. And typically you just stay within your own arc, but she's betrothed to Thorn, and so goes to live on his arc where things are fucking cutthroat. His family and his arc is insane. I was thoroughly shocked multiple times while reading this, not necessarily by like twists, but just by how like brutal characters can be. Because they tell you, they're like, yes, like everyone is like brutal. Like Thorn the entire time is like, only trust my aunt. And Ophelia, you know, doesn't. She does, but she doesn't. She's like, only your aunt. Like, geez, that's ridiculous. You let your guard down. Ophelia lets her guard down with people. Not the whole time, but occasionally. And just, I was always surprised when I let my guard down and then a character like did something. Even though, you know, we're told the entire time who we can trust. Really liked that part about it. I have this thing where I really like when the characters get like really beat up, whether it's emotionally or physically. I love seeing them get to their lowest points and then have to kind of get out of that. And I don't have a good reason for enjoying punching bag characters, but I do. They just are really entertaining to me to read about. And Ophelia definitely goes through a fuck ton in this book. It is so very much, and you know, traumatic stuff, and I'm looking forward to watching her just like climb to the top in this series. The romantic tension in this book too. I was so uninvested in Ophelia and Thorn until suddenly I was very invested in Ophelia and Thorn. I don't know what happens, but it's like being in boiling water, or you know, what's that phrase? Like a frog in boiling water. You don't realize you're like it's happening to you and that you're loving this thing until Not that the frog loves being in boiling water, but you know, they don't realize they're in boiling water until it's too late. And I like did not realize I was like so invested in this relationship until just suddenly I was invested. And that was cool. That doesn't happen that often where that kind of thing sneaks up on me. Kudos, Christelle Davos. It's definitely unique. I've never read anything quite like it. Pullman gets the closest, like I said, but even still, it is so very different. I'm definitely Ghibli-esque. I 100% agree on that. The only sci-fi I've read recently, I don't think I've read any other sci-fi, even though I've been kind of in a hankering for sci-fi, is Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh. Was not really prepared for what this book was going to be. It's probably a spoiler to say too much about it, so I won't. Also, fully realizing the end papers in the Illumicrate edition are spoilers, so that's a little insane. Wild to me. This is about Kier, who is part of a really extremist group of humans that live on a like space station. Before this book starts, a generation before Kier, or so, the generation before Kier, Earth is destroyed in this war by an artificial intelligence / god thing called the Wisdom. And a lot of the humans ended up going to another planet. They were basically resettled onto a planet that wasn't being used by anyone. And it's seen, you know, through this galactic, like, empire, it's seen as, like, this genocide and this horrible extinction level event what happened to Earth. It's seen as, like, a wide-scale tragedy, but it's also kind of acknowledged that the Wisdom will decide what's best. So there's a little bit of duality there. A lot of the humans have resettled, except for Gaia Station, which is what Kier lives on and where she's grown up. Very much akin to cult behavior or really closed off countries like North Korea, where, and I think that intentionally there were parallels being drawn in that way to countries like North Korea. Like, hold me super accountable on that, but I do believe so. Kier has trained to be a warrior. She's been very much raised in a society where they want revenge, they want to destroy the Wisdom, they want to basically win this war, even though the war is over. And Kier has very much drunk the Kool-Aid, very much wants to win the war and be a soldier, and then when it comes to actually being given her assignment, she is assigned to the breeding program instead. And that sort of sends Kier down this path of questioning. There's also very early on this alien named Yiso who ends up being captured by the Gaia Station, and Yiso is part of the alien race that is pretty much directly responsible for the Wisdom, and that makes Yiso very valuable. They were surprisingly one of my favorite characters. I actually started seeing, oh man, because Kier kind of has to come to terms with how she's been raised, and one of those things that really helps her come to terms with that is Yiso, and Kier starts to develop a friendship with Yiso and starts to see Yiso as a person and not just an alien enemy. And I feel like I personally got a lot out of reading about Yiso's character. This is gonna sound so like strange probably. I hate insects so very much. They freak me out on every level. They stress me out. They scare me. And I'm not an insect person at all. My instinct is always to just kill them if they're in the house, they're in my room. But I started seeing like Yiso in these insects, and like I've killed a couple, I'm not gonna lie, but I've definitely tried to save insects more than I ever have before. Not to say Yiso is an insect, they are a person, a character, but definitely reading Kier's realizations about Yiso and coming to terms with that made me kind of come to terms with my own problems with insects. So that is a really self-centered thing I got out of it, but it really did. And I think this is a just fantastic book. It's not at all what I thought it would be, and I think giving away too much could ruin the experience, so I don't want to. I really think it's a beneficial book to read, to remind yourself that you need to sort of open yourself up. And also, like, it's a really... I mean, there are actually moments where it's kind of hard to read, because when they talk about Earth being destroyed, some of those, like, passages are really intense. And it is also, like, look up the trigger warnings for this book. There's a lot. But it really made me appreciate what I have and what the world is today. And it's, like, hopeful and bleak and really, really surprisingly good. It's one that makes you think, though. It's not an easy read on, like, any level. Not at all. I have also read the first of Emily Tesch's Green Hollow duology, and I liked that a lot. I will read the second one soon. Also, you're gonna see a lot of Illumicrate books, I think. Well, I guess just these two, plus Godkiller. I do have the Illumicrate version, but I'm not reading that edition. Anyway, She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is horribly tagged as, like, Song of Achilles meets Mulan. No, I would disagree with that. On the very surface, it is those things, but in all the ways that matters, it is not those things. This is a very military fantasy, an extreme military fantasy, and it is brutal, and it also has this really center to it, is this reflection on being non-binary, to be, like, the central reflection of it. It's really good. It's really good. But it's not Song of Achilles meets Mulan, except for in the most absolute basic sense. It's very much its own thing. Look up trigger warnings for this one as well, even for gore, because there were a couple moments. There were a couple scenes that I was like, gee, fuck. I wanted to read this for a while. I'm not gonna, like, sit here and be like, I was about it. No, people say this is, like, a fantastic book. I wanted to read it for a while, but I was actually going to try to go to a book signing that Shelley Parker Chan was doing. That fell through because something else fell through, and the other thing that fell through I would rather have done, and so I just rescheduled it to the same weekend as the book signing, and I do not have the energy to do both. It's not, like, a huge loss. Next time they come around, I will try to see them. I can deal with it. And He Who Drowned the World comes out so soon. I cannot fucking wait. I am so excited for that one, because this one, I mean, it's not like a cliffhanger ending, but it definitely had me going like, oh, I'm glad I didn't have to wait 2 years. That would have been rough. I feel like I don't have that much to say about this one, because it's sort of slow. I do have something to say. I think that there were too many point of view characters. I did listen to it on audiobook, so that didn't help. But there were just so many times where I was like, okay, I think I know who this is, and I think I know this character's relationship to all the other characters. And then, like, another new character would be introduced as, like, a point of view character or very close to the point of view character, and I was like, I'm lost all of a sudden again. I think at the end of it, I did have it all kind of wrapped up, and I can reflect and be like, yes, that's how this connected to this. But while reading it, it was very confusing. Is there a glossary in here? Oh, the acknowledgements actually just made me, like, tear up a bit. I love reading acknowledgements. There is no glossary. It was good. I think the confusion really was me reading an audiobook while I was driving. I think if I had read it, like, physically, I don't think I would have had as much trouble, but that definitely was a thing that I would caution you just keep in mind. But it's good. It's as good as people say. Definitely look up the trigger warnings. It's brutal. It's a military fantasy, which is not my typical go-to, but this is convincing me that maybe I will like more military fantasies. Also, the Autumn Republic, I think, is it called the Autumn Republic or the Gunpowder? That series is going to be a Broken Binding series that they do, and I'm really excited for that, and I think that's military fantasy. I guess recommend me some military fantasy, and we'll see if I really like it. I love children's books, and I'm always looking for an excuse to pick them up. And I've had my eye on several John Klassens, but this one, The Skull, John Klassen, The Skull, is one that I knew I couldn't avoid. It came into work, and I immediately was like, I have to have it. First of all, it's beautiful, and also, look at Doggy's skull underneath. It is, I would say, a chapter book, probably. It's not really a picture book. It's too long almost for that and too intense. It's kind of dark and sad, but it's so aesthetic, and I loved the ending, and I loved the characters, and it's great. It is a Tyrolean folktale, which I did have to look up what that meant, and meant to look it up again before filming this part, but I didn't. So I will put the info on the screen or tag in editing me to let you know what a Tyrolean folktale is. It's about a girl named Otia, or Attila, who runs away from home and finds this old castle, and in the castle is this talking skull. And she becomes friendly with the skull, and the skull tells her, every night I can't sleep because a skeleton with no head comes looking for me, and I am afraid of it. And it's just a great book, and I really love the messaging in the end. I know that it's John Klassen's version of the fairy tale, and in the end he has an author's note where he talks about the changes he made to it, and I'm really glad he made these changes because I do think that the messaging there is a lot more interesting, personally. The art is, of course, also just gorgeous, but what would you expect? He is fantastic at art. And I really want to pick up Skunk and Badger, which is a book that he did the art for, but was written by someone else, and I can't remember at this moment. It took me a day to read this. I read it at night. I baked some cookies and read it in the evening, and it was so pleasing. This is definitely a very autumnal, wintry read, and I probably will end up rereading it this year at some point to capture all those vibes. It's so like goblin core. It's very goblin core of a read. Okay, Bride of the Shadow King by Sylvia Mercedes. I picked this up because Daphne Press is publishing the UK editions of the series, and I wanted to give it a read before I 100% committed to those series, and it was fine. It's a YA book. I think it's advertised as adult or new adult. It's not. It's a YA book. There's nothing in here that I don't find in YA books all the time. There's also less in here than in some YA books. And I think if I'd known that, I would have liked it a lot more going into it. It's a very slow start. It is, however, better than Fourth Wing. Not by much. Better than Fourth Wing. And I will be continuing with the series. I like supporting Daphne Press. I think those covers are pretty. And I mean, this is fine. I'm gonna unhaul this specific edition. I don't need it. I don't hate the cover though. I really don't. It's about Faraine. She is the eldest daughter of a kingdom, but she kind of fucked up, and she was engaged to this prince who she then, like, she fucks up the engagement and it doesn't go through, and so her father sends her to a convent. But then when it's time for her sister to be engaged to the Shadow King, Faraine is brought back to try to convince her sister to do it. There was a lot of really interesting setup and a lot of really interesting characters that could have gone farther, but besides Faraine and Vor, and I fucking hate that his name is Vor, besides them, there really isn't a lot of depth to the characters, which is one of the weaknesses. Faraine ends up sort of falling in love with Vor and vice versa, and that's really interesting tension, or it could have been really interesting tension. The court politics could have been even more interesting, but this one just stumbles on the court politic aspect of it. And I got the sense that the plot, really, the first half of the plot is just like all set up, and the second half of the plot is where the story really wanted to be, but because it came so late in the game, there wasn't time to actually do anything or anything interesting with that plot besides just like move in a very straightforward direction with it. I will continue the series. I am genuinely curious to see where it goes. There is this thing that happens near the very end that had me going, ooh, interesting. So we're gonna continue without regrets. It's also a very quick read, which is nice. That's a bonus. I read The Swimming Pool Library by Ellen Hollinghurst late last year. Or actually, it might have been around this time last year, now that I think about it. It was before I kept a Goodreads, so I'm not 100% sure on the time, but I was at work, at my current location. So, and I just hit my 1-year anniversary. Isn't that wild? But I read The Swimming Pool Library by Ellen Hollinghurst last year, and I really liked it. And at the time I thought it was like okay, it was good to okay, but the further I got from it, the more I felt the impression it had left on me. And so when I went to London, I picked up The Line of Beauty from Gaze the Word, actually, which is a really fun bookshop, and I wish I lived close to it because I would visit all the time. I wasn't planning to read this as my next like lit book that I read. I really wanted to read Atonement, actually, and I still ended up picking this up. It just like was staring at me from the bookcase for so long. Line of Beauty is about, I don't even know if I could say precisely. The setup is that Nick moves in, originally just for the summer, but he ends up staying multiple years there. He moves in with one of his friends' families, and they are a very wealthy, bougie family in London. They live in a really nice house in a really nice part of the city, and the father is a politician with a lot of aspirations, and Nick himself is very much a dreamer. He is very much interested in art. He is very much wants to be part of that family and that world, but also constantly keenly aware that he will never really be a part of it. He is also openly gay, and this takes place during the 80s. It has a lot to do with the AIDS crisis, without being directly about the AIDS crisis, but that very much is what it is about, as well as being about Margaret Thatcher and Thatcher politics and class divides at this time, and general discontent across the board, and people who aren't, or people who are content, and what that kind of person at this time looks like. It's sort of, though, a hard book to pin down and be like, this is precisely what it's about, because it is doing so much. I think that the reason I liked this more than The Swimming Pool Library, I will tell you that off the bat, and I'm looking forward to reading more Hollinghurst. I will probably read through his backlist at some point in the next couple of years, finish it. The Picador collections are putting out 2 others of his this year that I already have pre-ordered, so I might even pick up one of them. It's The Stranger's Child and The Sparsold Affair, so I'll probably pick up one of those before the end of the year. I have a feeling. I'm really excited about it. This one really cemented that I like Ellen Hollinghurst's writing a lot. I don't think I could pin down precisely in a really easy way and say what the book is about, though. It's called The Line of Beauty, and the aspect of what defines beauty and what is beautiful in a like pretentious scholarly way is also sort of part of it. What really strikes me is Nick. I felt myself oftentimes uncomfortably close to Nick in the way we think and what we are seeking in life, and he would definitely make very different decisions than I would. But a lot of times he would be reflecting or almost daydreaming, and I was like, this feels like you pulled this right out of my own mind in this very moment. So that was both uncomfortable and slightly glorious. It's also a very sad book. It was really difficult sometimes to get through it because it is about AIDS in some ways, and it takes a while for them to use that word, which makes it so much more powerful when it is finally used. But there's like a character really early on who we're just told, oh, he's been sick, and he's gay, and he's been sick. It's really taken a lot out of him, and the reader knows what's going on, even if the characters don't acknowledge it. And those were just really hard passages to read, and it's not a happy book. It is funny. It does have some very funny moments that surprised me, but it's not a happy book. to any extent. This won the Booker. Yes, it did win the Booker. I 100% see why it did, and it totally deserves it. And I think when I rated it on Goodreads and gave it the 5 stars, I think my review is something like it could never earn anything less than 5 stars because it's just so well done on every level. I fully think I will reread this one multiple times throughout my life. I think it's just an important book that I have added to my lexicon of books. Much less important is The Foxglove King by Hannah Whitten. A lot of people I know love Hannah Whitten. I probably should have started with her other series, because to be honest, the other series sounded more up my alley, but I'm trying to read more of the special editions I own, so I read Foxglove King. This is about, what? A girl who is sort of a spy. She's a shitty spy, though. That's like her whole thing. She's supposed to be like a really good spy. She's not. I was like, yeah, anyone would see through you. Come on, Lore. You're you're doing a terrible job. Anyway, so she's a spy. She's also like a poison runner. She works for some poison runners. This is a queer positive world. I really enjoyed that. I think the next book I talk about is also... Oh, and so is Godkiller. Oh, all of these books I think are queer to some extent. Hold on, what isn't? Well, if we were villains, I'm not sure. Winter's Promise wasn't specifically. The Skull wasn't, but that wouldn't have come into it. Bride of the Shadow King wasn't. So four books weren't on this list of like 10 that I pulled. You can see what I like to read, obviously. She also has powers to... She's a necromancer. I'm not gonna mince words. This explains a lot of it in the book. Like, they go deep into it, but she's a necromancer. Even though she never had a near-death encounter. And she's found by the church, basically. And the church is like, you either help us do this thing, or you'll be sent to be, like, slave labor on these, like, isles. And die there. And so, of course, she helps them, and they want her to get close to the Sun Prince and figure out why he's trying to ally with like an enemy nation or something. It's sort of a paper-thin plot, to be honest. And she's also paired up with one of the monks who was a nobleman, and they're like, well, you're like temporarily reinstated as like a nobleman. You don't have to do like your monthly duties. It's a very paper-thin plot. There's a lot of really cool aesthetics and a really cool like, world-building aspect as well. I loved the religions. I love the fact that the city is built over the body of a dead goddess. And that's one of the reasons that magic is like so potent and also dangerous. I thought that was really cool. I liked the almost like French court aesthetics. You know, we have the Sun Prince. And I generally liked the characters and the character builds and the character dynamics and the relationships, but I also felt like sometimes the characters were forced to do things that weren't rational in the way that characters not set up to think that way or to make those decisions, and they're just made to do those things in order for the plot to move forward. That was really frustrating. Every time it happened, it took me out of the story, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense for who we've gotten to know this character to be. And none of that was really even wrapped up and been like, well, actually, you didn't know this thing. We were holding it back from you as the reader. No, it just didn't make sense ever. And characters would like be like, oh, well, this must be the thing. And I'm like, well, how did you get there? Please tell me how, because I don't understand a lick of it. So there was a lot of good, and there was a lot of I will continue with the series. I am genuinely curious to see where it goes. But I'm not going to probably rush to continue it. I'll keep getting the fairy loots, though, because they are pretty additions. And I can appreciate a trilogy. I feel like there aren't as many trilogies being written anymore. I'm a big trilogy person. Trilogies are longer because I love being able to sit in a world for ages. But the last one I want to talk about is the book I actually just finished, and this is Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy Lynn. It's definitely younger YA. I will say this was like surprisingly really, really good. I enjoyed this far more than I thought I was going to. I thought I would like it, but I really liked it. It is about like magical tea making, and it's a magical tea making competition. I loved how the competition worked. The side characters had a lot less to do than our protagonist, but I liked the side characters. And again, because it's younger YA, it didn't need to go like deep into a lot of them. It was just like a fun, light read. And I think the dynamics worked really well. The magic system doesn't 100% make sense, but it's not like full of holes. It's just not perfect is all. And I also, I think it was a really great point where it broke off, because it's a duet, and they originally both came out the same year, and the end point I thought was like the perfect end point, because it was a huge shift. Everything shifted, and we got just the barest enough wrapped up that we can go into book 2, and it's like one continuous plot thread. So I'm really excited about that. I'll probably read book 2 very soon. I don't see why I would put it off. I don't have a ton to say about it. Magical tea competition is pretty much the extent of like plot that you need to know. If you're looking for a light read, this does a pretty good job of it. If you can handle younger YA, I think you'll really enjoy this. This is certainly on the much more palatable end. Like I've read some younger YA that is like so young, and young YA doesn't mean bad, but for me, I tend to have aged myself out of this age range. Not YA in general, but like younger end. So it's really nice to like come across something where the writing is like so good that I want to read it. So yeah, for me, it works really well. So if you're also kind of in that same boat and you still kind of like YA a little bit, but you're worried you might have aged out, I think this one's actually pretty good across the board. So those are what I've been reading in the last, like, I don't know, several weeks. I have not been reading as quickly as I was. I just think I needed a very much mental break from things, and it's started picking up again, but there were a couple weeks where I was just like really slowed down and like not even finishing a book a week. And typically I do read about a book a week, and actually typically I read about 2 books a week. As I average like 100 pages a day, I think, when I include like audiobook and everything. By the time this goes up, I might have finished Godkiller. I don't think I'll have finished If We Were Villains, but I could be wrong. I kind of want to read, like I said, Archive Undying. I also kind of want to read Immortal Longings, but I might do Archive Undying and then Immortal Longings. Have you read anything really good lately? Let me know. I'm always, I mean, I don't know why I hesitated on this. I am always looking for good things to read. You saw what I've read recently, what I've enjoyed. So if you have anything similar to these, please feel free to recommend. I would love to know. And if you are new here and you want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it. And if you're already subscribed, thank you, thank you, thank you. It means the world to me. We are getting so close to 1,000, which is my goal for the year. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you. If you're somewhere cold, I hope you're staying warm. If you're somewhere warm, I hope you're staying comfortable. And most of all, I hope you're reading a great book. I will see you guys next time. Bye!